Okay, just to introduce Sue from Queensland Family History. She has been interested in family history since she was a teenager and was loaned a copy of a diary and letters written by her 3 times great-grandparents, missionaries in the Tartary and Russia in the early 19th century. The missionary Dr. Robert Ross, with his second wife, later came to Brisbane and lived next door to David Jones and his wife Jane. Robert Ross's son married David and Jane Jones's daughter. Her maternal family's recorded a lot of family history on this and other families, which has been valuable in her research. She's acquired a uniquely English family name, so uncommon she's yet to meet someone who shares the same family. I, of course, have naturally met them. She and her relations are trying to find where this family came from before they settled in London. However, she's currently researching her gentleman ancestor from Brighton, who was convicted, amongst other things, for bribery and spent much of his life as a bankrupt. She's actively involved in researching family history for 30 years since she joined Queensland Family History. She's president of the Society and convenes the computer training group and convenes the Family History Writing Group. Training and writing. An avid internet researcher, she's interested in the way the internet is changing the way people research and the impact it has on family history societies. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Stephanie. Almost 40 years ago, my father and I were wandering around in Cooktown Cemetery, and we came across...
Put the mic a little closer, please.
Is that better?
Thank you.
We came across a headstone belonging to a man by the name of James Gibson. My father claimed him as a relative. And you can see some of the names. I'm not quite sure why I wrote those names down there at the bottom, but this is the original piece of paper that I wrote that headstone on 40 years ago. So, thanks to the wonders of the internet, here's a photo of that very same headstone. Now, I'm going to ask you to indulge in a little bit of fantasy here. Let's pretend it wasn't 1973 that I found this headstone. Let's pretend it was 2012 and I found it yesterday or last week or last month or last time I was up there. So what I'm going to ask to do today, what I'm going to phase my talk around is how can we use the records of the Queensland Family History Society to research James Gibson and his family. Queensland Family History Society has its Library and Resource Centre at 58 Bellevue Avenue, Gaythorne, and all the details are available on our internet site, and the web address is there at the bottom. And if you also pick up one of our glossy brochures, you'll see a summary of all the services we offer. Okay, so the first thing that I might do in looking at James Gibson's life is to consult the birth, death and marriage indexes of the Queensland Family History Society. Now, at the Society, we hold those birth, death and marriage indexes on microfiche and on CD. And the advantage of the indexes on microfiche is that they show you the exact birth date or the exact death date or marriage date up to those years indicated there. So births to 1919, marriages to 39, deaths to 1964. Sure, you can get the year off the internet, but by using either the microfiche or the CD, which is a little bit limited in years, you can get the exact date of the event, which in many cases will save you the cost of buying a certificate. So when we look at those, when we look at the birth, death and marriage indexes, and in particular the death index for James Gibson, and you probably can't see it, but it's right there. We know that he died on the 11th of June 1916. We also now find that his parents are Thomas Gibson and Annabella Hamilton, and we also have the reference number for the certificate should we want to buy that. So combining the information that we have found from the headstone and from the index of deaths, we've got all this information in summary. Now at this point I could note that James Gibson was born in Ayr, Scotland in 1835, and so if I wanted to to find out more information, to find more ways of researching his birth and his family background, I could join our Scottish Special Interest Group at the Society. We have a number of special interest groups in our society which deal with particular areas. So I think there are 9 special interest groups. 5 are regional special interest groups. So we have a special interest group which caters for Ireland, Scotland, Wales, English West Country and the Central European area. We have 2 special interest groups who deal with family history software, the Master Genealogist user group and the Family Tree Maker user group. We have a writing group, so when I come to writing up James Gibson's life, I can rock along to the writing group. And we have a pre-separation group for those people who have lineal ancestors who were in Queensland before separation. All of those groups are free to all members of the Society, so members of the Society can come along to those particular groups and learn more about the special interests, their special interests in that particular area. So, if we, in looking at the birth, death and marriage indexes for Queensland, we find that there's no other reference to James Gibson's family in the Queensland records. So we need to start looking elsewhere. You know, we assumed there were some names written on that scrap of paper that I wrote 40 years ago in Cooktown Cemetery, so it's highly likely that he has other family members which we need to trace. So, at the Queensland Family History Society, you can access the internet and have a look at the birth, death and marriage indexes for New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia, and you can do that from home as well, of course. We also have those records on microfiche or on CD at the Society, and we do know that there are some errors in the online indexes, so it's always worthwhile to go back and have a look at the microfiche or the microfilm. But there are indexes to births, deaths and marriages which are not available via the internet. For example, Victoria is pretty stingy and requires you to pay even to look at the indexes via the internet. But come to the Society and you can have free access to those for almost as long as you like, or as long as the computers are available. They're very popular. Similarly with Tasmania and Northern Territory. We have other birth, death and marriage indexes, of course, for other countries, New Zealand and particularly in the United Kingdom. And you can research all of those at the Society. So, in looking at some of the other records that we have, say the New South Wales ones, we can find some of the members of James Gibson's family. So he married Mary Jane Betts in Parramatta, and there are his 8 children, 4 sons followed by 4 daughters. And if you know anything about Australian history, you might combine that little clue there for the number 3 son, Marsden, with the word Parramatta and all the births in Parramatta, and perhaps if that might provide a clue to a greater family connection, and in fact there is. Mary Jane Betts was in fact the granddaughter of the Reverend Samuel Marsden. So, how can we find out a little bit more? Well, we could consult our cemetery records, and we have a dedicated cemetery room. Sounds a bit grim, but we do have a dedicated cemetery room at our Society. And one of the highlights of our collection in that Society is the James Bond collection. George Bond. We should be so lucky. George Bond collection. And that's a little picture of George over there on the left. George was a monumental mason. And George went to his just rewards last year after being married 3 times. And I was fortunate enough to meet George early last year, and he was very sad because he'd been out the day before on a St Valentine's bus trip, and his sweetheart wasn't there. So he married 3 times and he was lining up another one. George, as a monumental mason, noted that a lot of headstones were deteriorating, being vandalised, and just plain disappearing. So he began to photograph headstones, not in a family history sense, but to preserve them, and at least in pictorial form. His collection grew so large that he couldn't house it. He was eventually in an aged care facility, and so he gave it to us. And on the right-hand photo there, you can see at the left-hand side part of the collection of the James Bond photographs. On the right-hand side of that large photo, you can see some of our cemetery's transcripts. So, just a little bit more about the George Bond collection. We have our own piece of software which has been designed in-house, which has indexed, which allows you to search the George Bond collection. It has more than 48,000 items, and it's computer indexed. And the little photograph down on the bottom there from the Cairns cemetery shows you the sorts of things you might get. Unfortunately, George didn't get to Cooktown, but then we could find that on the internet anyway. So it's computer indexed, and you can order copies. In terms of cemeteries, sorry, I need to go back. In terms of cemeteries, we have 700 items in the catalogue, so that includes transcripts and transcripts of headstones and monumental inscriptions. We have cemetery indices in print. We have a cemetery card index. We have 3 series of cemetery card indexes. We have Queensland Family History Society Data Search Cemetery Index, and that's distinct from the George Bond collection, and cemetery transcripts both for Australia and for overseas. Now, our collection predominantly is for Queensland, but we do have records for other states in Australia. We also have some funeral directors' records. So, here's a Queensland Family History Society Data Search Cemetery Index, a result sheet. So this one is quite distinct from the George Bond collection. And when we look at this, we find that there are 2 entries for James Gibson in Cooktown Cemetery. Now, the thing about cemetery indexes is that there is no hard and fast rule about how groups of people go out and research and record cemeteries. They may just record the index, the burial index, they may just record the headstones, or they may record the full monumental inscription on the headstones. So it's always worth having a really, really good look at what's there. So in this case, we have two entries for James Gibson, and the reason is that when the Cairns group did this particular book, they divided it into 3 parts. So one part was a transcript of the monumental inscription, one part was the burial register for Cooktown, and then the third part of their little book was the cemeteries around Cooktown. So, it's really a bit of a lucky dip when you're looking at cemetery records to find what's there, but as I say, we have 700 items and you really never know your luck in what you might find. The next thing we might look at to find out a little bit more about James Gibson is the electoral rolls. The Toowoomba and Darling Downs group have indexed the electoral rolls in the latter part of the 19th century, and there you can see some records for James Gibson. First of all, from 1876 to 1879, he was at a place called Milangera, which is in northwestern Queensland. And then from 1883 to 1884, he was at Kings Plains in Cooktown. So we're beginning to build up, by looking at all of these things, we're beginning to build up a picture of what was happening with James Gibson. In terms of the 20th century, the Queensland Family History Society has indexed a number of electoral rolls, and they have done one for every decade from 1903. It was the first one they did right up until 1959, and we're currently working on 1969. Now, there are other electoral rolls available on fish, which haven't been indexed yet. So we do have a very extensive fish collection and microfiche readers, which are free for people to come and research. So when we summarise those electoral rolls, we can see that James was in Queensland from 1876, and sometime between 1879 and 1883 he moved to Cooktown, where he stayed until 1915. Of course, he died in 1916. Mary Jane, his wife, gained suffrage in the 20th century, and there she is recorded in the 20th century rolls. In Kings Plains, Norman Henry stayed in Kings Plains till 1922. Marsden went off on his own, and one of the sisters, Janet, stayed there until 1922. So we can assume that from somewhere between 1922 and 1934, Kings Plains was sold and the family moved on somewhere else. So, just in summary again, in terms of electoral rolls, we have Queensland State electoral rolls from 1870. We have Queensland Commonwealth electoral rolls, and those years there are the ones that have been indexed. We have other Australian electoral rolls, and we have more than 100 items of voters' lists worldwide, and that includes 19th century poll books from the United Kingdom. And the poll books are quite interesting because not only do they give the name and address of the voter, but they also tell you who that particular person voted for. These are available, as I said, both on the computer network and on microfiche. And I might just take a minute to talk about the computer network because we have 9 computers available to all members, access to the internet, and access to thousands and thousands of CD applications. Each computer is able to access any of those computer applications. So in order to find a little bit more about James Gibson, we could consult the brands directories, and the Society has indexed a number of brands directories, and the years are shown there. And there's a couple of little screen clips from some of the information from the brands directory. So we can see that Mary Jane had her own brand and she transferred it to her husband. And then a little bit later on, we can see that they have a brand registered at Cooktown, Kings Plains, Cooktown. That's a change of address. We have state and regional directories. So just as an example of the sorts of directories we have 770, more than 770 items, Australia-wide, Queensland and worldwide, and that they are in book form, microfiche form and CD. So they cover all sorts of things. Post office directories were the precursor to telephone books and told you where people lived. Brands directories I've already mentioned, bankruptcy, medical, ecclesiastical. It's always good if you can organise to have a minister of religion in your family because the records for them are very, very good. Telephone directories and something which is slightly different, which is members' interest directories. So in terms of Queensland specifically, we have gazettes, and again, more than 300 items covering the whole of the world, and they are available in all sorts of media. And we have particular strength for Queensland in government gazettes, police gazettes and education gazettes. And the photograph on the right there shows you an education gazette from 1899 to 1905. So we can also use those to track what James Gibson was doing and to get a bigger picture of him. And there are 3 little pieces there from the Queensland Gazette of 1904, which indicates that James Gibson was a Justice of the Peace. And we could track that through a whole range of gazettes. So specifically for Queensland, we have a large range of gazettes, government gazettes from 1859 to 1910, police gazettes 1864 to 1943, education gazettes from 1899 to 1959. These are all available via the computer network, and our technical advisory group have organised them so that they are globally keyword searchable. So you can go in and look at a government gazette, you can type your search term in with a couple of keystrokes, press a key, it will search thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of government gazettes and return the results to you in a matter of seconds, and then you can examine each one of those results and track your person right through all the years of the government gazettes. Of course, we have books and journals, and we have a catalogue which you can use online from the comfort of your own home, so you can plan your visit before you arrive at the Society. This is a rather old catalogue. It's available in two places on the website. So this is the screenshot of our website. So you will find it under Home and About, and you'll also find it under Services. And you can use that catalogue to have a look and see what particular holdings we have. So we have more than 7,000 books, 200 journal titles and 2,690 electronic resources. And that last figure, I had a different figure in there, and the technical advisory group corrected me and said, no, now we have 2,690. And the bottom of that screen shows you our new professional standard catalogue that we have for searching for books. Within the library, unfortunately, we haven't been able yet to make it available via the internet, but that will happen in due course. So, in terms of building up a bigger picture of the Gibson family in Cooktown, we could search for Cooktown in the catalogue and come up with a number of books, of which this is one. So, the Queen of the North and the Pictorial History of Queensland, of Cooktown, and Cape York Peninsula, and that would allow us to find out a little bit more about what it was like living in Cooktown in the early years of the 20th century. We have a very extensive map collection with more than 1,500 items, and again that covers the whole world. The map collection is divided into two sections, family history maps and general maps, and it's computer indexed. So I asked the map team to give me some assistance with this, and they went off and found a map from the 1 inch to 2 mile series for the Solander district, and here is Cooktown is just here, and the little square that you can see there on the left, blown up larger on the right, shows you exactly where Kings Plains is. We have recently purchased a collection of World War I unit histories, and if we start looking a little bit further at James Gibson's family, we can find that one of his sons was in the Light Horse in World War I, and we have some books which pertain to the Light Horse in our World War I unit histories collection to add a little bit more. So then I could start looking at the internet and find some more information about James Gibson, and find this wonderful site called Obituaries Australia, and you'll probably recognise that's where I got the photo from. And that's an obituary for James Gibson which appeared in the Pastoral Review of 1916. And we couldn't go past looking at Trove. And on the 7th of October 1909, in the Queenslander, they published 50 Years in Queensland, Living Pioneer Colonists. And down here, we find that James Gibson gets a mention, and thanks to the State Library of Queensland many, many years ago, sent me that photo of James Gibson in his solar tupee. And all of that information and much, much more available at Queensland Family History Society. As I say, it's open 6 days a week, easy access to public transport, ample street parking, and all the details are available on our website.
Thank you.